Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining this Dymocks book event with American crime writer par excellence, Michael Connelly, who I'll introduce in just a moment. My name is Sue Turnbull, and by day I'm Professor of Communication and Media at the University of Wollongong, and by night I'm a crime fiction reviewer for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. And how we're going to run this event is I'm going to talk to Michael for about half an hour, and then we're going to announce the winners of the Fair Warning Book of the Month that's been running through Dymocks, and Michael will read out the winners. And then we're going to open for questions, and depending on how we go with the questions, we'll go 40 minutes, 45 minutes, see how we go. So that's how we're going to run it. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Michael Connelly, who well, it really needs no introduction, but here we go anyway. You know, he's written 35 novels, he's sold 74 million copies worldwide, he's won the Crime Writers Association Diamond Dagger Award for his contribution to crime fiction. And of course, in the process, he's given us Harry Bosch, who is now, of course, on a TV series as well that Michael is co-producing. He's given us Mickey Haller, and as my son pointed out, led to the renaissance of Michael McConaughey, the reconnaissance in the movie that was made of the Lincoln Lawyer. And of course, he's given us Jack McAvoy, who is the protagonist of Fair Warning, this most recent book. So, Michael, welcome. And why has it taken so long to give us Jack again?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. It's a brave new world where we're doing virtual events, and it's actually been kind of fun. So hopefully we'll have some fun over the next hour. Why does it take so long to get to Jack? Well, a couple of reasons. One, I guess the main one is I did what Jack does for about 15 years of my life, and so therefore he's kind of a alter ego to me, and I just find it as a writer more interesting to explore and write about people that are different from me, don't think like me, and so when I make choices of like who am I going to write about this year, I always get pulled away by some character that I want to explore, as opposed to exploring a guy who's very much like me.
Okay, but he first appeared in The Poet, right, in 96, and in many ways I think that was kind of, I know that you won an Edgar with your first book, but The Poet was really the kind of international global breakthrough book, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and I'm not really sure why, but I had written, my first 4 books were all Harry Bosch books, and I kind of had a slow incremental growth, and people were finding out about me on a kind of a slow motion type of situation. And then I wrote The Poet, and I guess because it was considered a thriller as opposed to a police procedural, a thriller, I think opens up the audience some, and plus I think publishers really know how to stage a book like that. So that kind of became my breakout book in Australia and many other countries.
So one of the reasons that I think, you said that Jack is something of an alter ego. He's also a journalist. And I'm interested in the fact that, he appeared in 96 and what journalism was like in 96. He appeared in 2009, what journalism was like in 2009. And here he is in 2020. And in some ways, his career has marked the trajectory of journalism over the last 25 years. So what was it you wanted to say about journalism right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's one, you say, why does it take so long to get to him? One reason is that when I get this instinctive feel like I should kind of say where we're at, kind of state of the union in terms of media, and I like doing that. And this one was more pressing than usual, just because in my country and in a lot of world, there's a growing distrust of the media. And a lot of this is forged in politics, and it's kind of like kill the messenger or shoot the messenger type stuff. You don't like a free media that is looking into things, then you try to destroy the media. And so that, having spent 15 years in that business, it very much upsets me. They're calling in my country. They're calling the people in the White House are calling the press the enemy of the people, and that to me is crazy. So what can I do? I write thrillers, but I thought if I wrote about a journalist who was unbiased, undaunted, and just a straight line truth seeker, it would be like just a little story about the value of good journalism and good journalists, and maybe change a few minds from that idea that journalists can't be trusted, or that they're enemy of the people, or any kind of negative story is considered fake news. It's not a political book, but it has a political motive behind it.
It would seem from the comments that quite a few people have actually read the book, but I wondered if you could just give us a very brief synopsis, because I want to perhaps draw out, the way in which you're commenting about major themes. I mean, journalism is one, but the other is also DNA and the management of that particular industry. So if you could just give people who haven't read the book a brief synopsis, and then maybe we could talk about some of those themes.
Yeah, I mean, I just talked about the idea of the journalism in inspiration for this story, but there was also a technical one, or a technological one. I had read last year, there was a story where the Pentagon, which is the head of all the military in the United States, put out a directive to everybody in the military saying, do not submit your DNA to any of these analytical firms that give you your hereditary background and medical and so forth, because of concerns over the security of your DNA. And I just thought, oh, that's pretty interesting, because this is like a huge thing now. It's $1 billion industry. What's the concern about security? So I'm a former journalist, and I research my books a lot like a journalist researches a story. I kind of went down a rabbit hole of looking into what, if any, regulations are on that industry, and I found there's none. And so that immediately inspired the idea that there's got to be a thriller I can build out of this, because the repeated themes in the Jack's books, besides journalism, is this: each book, there's only been 3, but each book he goes down a rabbit hole into some form of technology. The idea being that for every great advance we make in terms of technology, in this case, we've mapped the human genome, which is a fantastic thing. But there's going to be somebody out there who's going to try to turn it against us, who's going to be a villain in the mix of this great accomplishment. And so that's what happened here. Sorry for my long answer. I didn't really even set up the book. That's the background of the book. And just very early in the book, Jack is working at a small news site, internet news site called Fair Warning, when the LA police come to him and question him about his relationship with a woman who's been murdered. And he hasn't seen this woman in a year, but he's become a person of interest. They ask him for his DNA to clear him and so forth. And that's kind of the starting point. And, Jack's not a guy who's going to be on the sidelines. They tell him he's a person of interest in a murder investigation. Well, he's going to try to clear himself, clear his name himself. And so we're kind of off to the races with Jack looking into the same murder that the LAPD is investigating.
I'm interested in the book because, the poet, Scarecrow, and now this one, they all feature a serial killer. It's a plot mechanism. And I've actually just done a draft review of your book, and I've said the serial killer is possibly the least interesting aspect of it. And in some ways, the 90s, the serial killer was big. And I'm just wondering, as a crime writer, whether you had any hesitation about going back to the idea of a serial killer, not because they may not exist anymore, but because they're sort of not as fashionable as they used to be.
Yeah, I had a little bit of it, and I think you can see that in the book. I guess this is a giveaway, but I'll say it anyway. We never even know who the serial killer is in this book, and I think that's me saying that's not what's important. To me, it's the work that he does as a journalist, and what he finds out. And I know it's a novel, but it says in the book, this is the science and this is the regulations as I wrote this book. And I finished writing it at the end of last year, so I don't think anything has changed. So there's some reporting in the book, and I think that's more interesting than the serial killer. But I do come back to that trope, if you want to call it that, just simply because it just makes a thriller work so well when the villain is not finished, that there can be more victims. It puts a clock, it puts tension, it puts all these things that gives a story a lot of momentum. And so that's why it may be lazy, but I keep going back to it.
Well, it's interesting coming back to the real references, because, as you said, Fair Warning is actually a real newspaper, and I was noticing even in all your books, real people sneak in. There is a lot of references. You're putting in real detectives, and their names are kind of appearing. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm following this thing that. I came to this from journalism, and so I just felt like I want to be as accurate as I can. I want to present a real world in fiction. I know it's a novel, I know it's fiction, and the main characters, there's no Jack McAvoy, there's no Harry Bosch, but I feel like if I plant their feet in a real world, it helps me write the book, and I think it helps the reading of it. And a lot of people won't know that these characters are real, but they're real to me. So when I'm writing the book, I'm seeing the real person. In this book, Jack works for an editor named Myron Levin. There's a real Myron Levin. I worked with him 30 years ago, and now he runs the real Fair Warning. I've always used real places. The last book, he worked for the LA Times. The book before that, The Poet. It was the Rocky Mountain News. I always use real places, and so I continue that, and I'll put in detectives and so forth that I know, because I know what they look like, I know how they talk, and then that helps me write those moments or those scenes.
Yeah, and one of the things that Jack does towards the end of this book, which this is not a spoiler, anybody, I'm not giving anything away, but he moves away from the newspaper world. He's had enough of that, and he starts doing his podcast. And his podcast is called Murder Beat, and your podcast is called Murder Book. I've just spent an interesting week listening to Murder Book in the car, which is the perfect place to do it. Is this the future of journalism, you think, going into podcasting?
I don't know if it's the future. I think it's an offshoot of it. I think it's an interesting development of the last 5 to 10 years. It coincided with me. I left journalism in '94, so it's so long ago. It was a different world back then.
Yeah.
And I spent 25 years since writing fiction, but for a lot of the reasons that I wrote this book, I've been drawn back to wanting to tell true stories. And so I started this podcast, and the first season was about a true murder case, and I'm going to do another one probably in the fall. And to me, it's journalism, but I don't know if it's going to take the place of anything. But I think it's just an ancillary way of getting, the diversity of podcasts is amazing. From politics to crime to entertainment and so forth. So there's a lot out there, just like there's a lot in newspapers.
And what was revealed to me listening to that is the names of the detectives who've been your friends for many, many, many years. I mean, you've had these close friends in the LAPD who clearly have give you background and details that add to the authenticity of the investigations that you're describing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate to call them sources, because, as you say, they're very good friends. But yeah, they've been. I don't think I'd have what I have going on in my books without their help. So they've been critical, and one of them, Mitzi Roberts, directly inspired Renee Ballard, a character I've been writing about in the last few years. So I draw a lot from them, and they've been extremely helpful.
Okay. You mentioned Rachel Walling. I mean, she's a very interesting character, and I was just rereading The Poet, and there's a reference in Fair Warning at some point where she throws somebody down on the bed, and there's a reference to the fact that that's when Jack and she first met in The Poet. She threw him down on the bed, and I thought that's a really kind of neat. She's very much a kind of art character that stays with you. I did have a question though: are they aging at the same rate as we are?
Yeah, and I had to kind of disguise that a little bit because I wanted I wanted Jack to be a little younger. I wanted him in his 50s, and I think he's getting close to 60. But I fudged it a little bit, just a couple of years. But then again, the story is not really, there's not a lot of dates and so forth in the story.
Mm. There's also a real challenge when you've got a couple like Rachel and Jack and the silver bullet theory. I mean, would you like to tell the watchers and the readers what the silver bullet theory is, because it comes in beautifully in this particular book?
It's just this idea that Rachel had, and she's told it to she's even told it to Harry Bosch, because there's a book where she and Harry Bosch cross paths, actually two books, but just this idea that everybody has someone out there in the world that kind of has your name on their name on a bullet that's going to pierce your heart, and that you're lucky in life if you happen to find that person, and if you find that person, it might not seem like a great fit, but you really got to fight to try to keep that, because that's the person for you. I don't know if I said it right, but
it's beautiful, and in fact, I think Rachel gives Harry the bullet at some point, and I just thought to myself, this is a great marketing opportunity.
Putting your name on a bullet, then you might have trouble getting on planes and stuff.
You might indeed, but the other thing about that relationship is, you've managed it now over 25 years, that they come together, they move apart, they come together, they move apart. They can never really be together, because that would be the end of the series, would it not? I mean, it's so hard to manage those ongoing relationships, managing the unresolved sexual tension in such a way that you don't jump the shark, as, remember, Moonlighting, that great television series of the 80s did, when it put Maddie and David together, and it just failed completely.
Yeah, I mean, you always want your characters, to be wanting something, to be longing for something, and it could be an answer, it could be a person, it could be all these things. Mm. And so when they reach a level of satisfaction, there's not a whole lot more to say.
Yeah.
So and if you get lucky, I got very lucky with Harry Bosch, and I've been writing about him, several times over many, many years. And he's never found what he's looking for. So it kind of shifts into like, boy, you're really torturing this guy. Why can't he have any kind of ultimate happiness? But you're selfish. You're the writer. You want to keep this series going, but that if Harry Bosch ever comes home, opens the front door and says, "Honey, I'm home," then that's it. He's probably reading the last book.
Mm. But at the end of, and again, this is not a spoiler, there is the possibility that Jack and Rachel might work together. So I'm thinking, is this going to be a new series? Could this happen? I did feel teased to the possibility that we might get a rather different version of Jack and Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, I do that a lot in my books. I leave doors open, and then I have it's great to then be able to decide what to do, and you have these options. I'm always trying to give myself options. I don't plan too far ahead. I'm writing a book now for this fall, and I don't know what I'll do next, but I'll know that I have set up something in this book that I can come back to. I set up stuff in the Boschman and Ballard books. So my guess is it won't be another 10 years before we see Jack. I think I'll come back to him sooner. And I think that's an offshoot of what's going on in the world today. Not only the stuff I've talked about with the press kind of under the gun, but also, the unrest that's going on in my country, and also noticed, obviously, by everyone around the world. Again, it just underlines to me the need for a free media, and the power of it. I mean, it's very interesting that in this book, very interesting to me, I should say. I shouldn't speak for anyone else, but in this book, I have Jack arrested by the cops on a very questionable deal. They're just trying to harass him and make him spend the night in jail.
Mm.
And I was thinking, I might get pushback on that, especially from my friends in the LAPD. And then, over the last week, the number of journalists that have been arrested for just doing their jobs at these protests made me think, oh, I'm in the clear now, because they're running roughshod on journalists out there. And I think it's all set from a viewpoint in Washington that reporters are untrustworthy, that the media is fake, all that kind of stuff. It kind of sets the standard that we think you can make a causal connection between what's said there and cops just coming up and shooting LA Times reporters with rubber bullets and things like that, which is all documented on video.
I mean, we've also had mass demonstrations this weekend in terms of Black Lives Matter. There's been a real response in Australia to recognise the injustices that have been committed against the Indigenous population, and similar kinds of appalling handling by the police of black deaths in custody. And so it's...
What happened?
Oh, what happened? We went dark. Everything, my screen just completely died.
Oh, I see you and I can hear you.
So, oh, good. Well, I'll carry on then. Okay, something just completely, really lost the signal completely. Anyway, if you can still hear me, I'll continue.
Okay.
Which is one of the technological marvels of our time. But yeah, so it was my observation that from the outside, things look very serious in America. It really does look as though America is kind of broken at its heart, and that this has been developing for some time, and that it's reached a crisis point. Is that your perception?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. If there's anything good about it, it's that this is not going to be like all the other times. I don't think. I think this is a tipping point where I think we're, especially it's tied into the election. If we get a president who's interested in police reform, that's going to be a key thing. But even without that, I just think, police departments and cities are just going to start looking at this, because this has become amazingly big, and it's a groundswell, and I think things are going to change.
Yeah. Okay, well, I have completely lost visual contact, so I can't actually read what's on the screen, Tim. This is one of those moments when I might need our technician to jump in and help us, because I can't read anything. So
your thing didn't just go dark because you haven't touched the key or anything?
I haven't touched a single thing. Nothing has moved. So I've just gone completely dark.
We're getting messages saying that everyone can see and hear us both. So
okay,
it must be room for you to do this in the dark, but if we start, then I think we'll be okay. And I can read stuff.
Oh, you can read stuff. Good. Well, then you will have to do it, because you'll have to do all the answering of the questions. And I'm just talking to a little green light now, which is fine.
All right.
Okay. So also I've lost my timing, which is another slight problem in this. But as a crime writer, how do you consider that what is happening is going to appear in your crime novels? Is this inevitably, is this background going to provide, how do you reflect this when you're writing, I guess is what I want to know.
All I can tell you is that it absolutely will, but I don't know when and I don't know how, because a couple things, it's two things. Like a week ago, if we had done this, you would ask, would the virus be in my future books? And my answer would be the same. Yes, I write very contemporary books that are reflective of what's going on. I can't see the book I'm writing for the fall is a Lincoln Lawyer book. And it's set in February. It's set in February this year. And so you see, it's just the beginning of the virus, and we're getting some warnings and we're ignoring them, and we're quite naive about it. Yeah. And that will be what's going on there. I couldn't set it much further because I don't know what's going to happen. So you can't accurately reflect something that you don't know is going to happen. And there's a little bit about that in this police situation, but I can't see myself writing about Harry Bosch ever again without that writing uh, being filtered through what's going on right now. Now, keep in mind, Harry's not a guy in uniform, and so there is a separation to that. But I mean, I think I will try to not try. I know I'll have to do this. It's kind of my duty. I will have to write those stories and find a way of bringing this into a detective story. Because otherwise, I'll just feel like the work and the books are going to be kind of hollow without it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, is writing a way of dealing with these things for you? Is this how you work through your ideas, and is this how you work through the situation that's unfolding?
Yeah, I mean, I try to spend time with the kind of people I write about, whether defense lawyers, detectives, and so forth. Obviously, I call it research by osmosis. I spend time in the places I write about, and it's kind of like throwing out a net, and eventually, you're constantly pulling up the net to see what you have. I hear a lot of stories, and somehow it all kind of comes together, and then I start writing a book. It's kind of like this book I told you. I've been concerned about what's going on with the media for 3 years now. I came across a story about DNA, and it was just like it's like atoms smashing together and creating a new entity or compound. It's like I kind of had. I'm going to take It's time to bring Jack off the shelf, put him on a story with this technology, and use that story to show a good journalist at work, and maybe that will mean something to somebody. That's pretty much how it works. And so I'm very interested in the police situation and what's going on right now. Invariably, I know it's going to end up in what I do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that obviously you've got more books in the pipeline, and I think we sort of said, do you think you'll come back to Jack, or do you have to wait till the inspiration strikes? I mean, I like him so much as a character that I would love to see more about him.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just it's hard to describe why I decided to do what. Another thing that's weighing on me right now is the idea is, are people going to be interested in police novels after this? I write Jack as an outsider. He gets arrested in this thing. He's an antagonist to the police. Mickey Holler's a defense attorney. That's the definition of an antagonist to police. And, maybe our culture or our society is moving towards these are the kind of stories that will fare better. And, on one hand, I should never lick my finger and hold it up to the wind to decide what to write. But I have a cast of characters that I love spending time with. So it's not a big deal for me to say, let's give the police novels a rest for a couple of years. I mean, I was already doing that this year. I have 2 books, and they're not Harry Bosch books, and they're not Renee Ballard books. So, I mean, Harry makes an appearance in the one I have coming in the fall, but he's not a big part of it. So you just kind of fly by instinct, and something usually tells me what to write next.
And it seems like, you just keep going. You've got so many projects on, and another podcast coming. In some ways, rather than slowing down, it seems to me like you're speeding up.
Yeah, I guess I'm very lucky that I get to do what I'm doing, that I've had these amazing opportunities. And it's like, I really respect it. And I respect the people that are put me in this position, the readers, the watchers. And so you got to cherish what you get, and that's what I do. So I have a pretty good work ethic, and I don't feel like I'm under the gun or anything. I write at the pace I like to write, and no one's more harsh about it than me. I'm my harshest critic, and I think that's a good way to be. And so I'll just keep doing this.
Brilliant. Okay, well, maybe now is the moment that we should announce the winners. And I'm afraid, Michael, you're going to have to do this work for yourself because I can't see anything.
You're still in the dark. Okay.
I'm still in the dark. I think that could be a sort of metaphor for my existence. So we're going to share the lucky winners of the Fair Warning Book of the Month award giveaway that was run across the Dymocks social network sites. And the prizes are courtesy of Michael's publisher in Australia, Allen and Unwin. And so I believe there are 5 prizes to announce there, Michael, 3 on Facebook and 2 on Instagram.
Yeah. So the Facebook winners are Lachlan Wheeler, Danny Lease, Damian John, and the Instagram winners are at Shellbell Dimmy and at twice the amount of spare time. So they're the 5 winners, and you had to, kind of put in a what do you call it? A headline. I think it was a maximum of 250 characters, a headline, and then they picked the winners from that.
Yeah.
We thought we'd read a couple of them, like Lachlan Wheeler's winning entry was Stop Press. Man scales Sydney Harbor Bridge and vows not to descend until he wins latest Michael Connelly novel. That's a good one. I don't know if they wanted me to read the others. Let's see. We got one coming up here. Okay. Danny Leases said, fair warning, middle-aged reader threatens to turn to crime. Watch out, Sunshine Coast booksellers. Desperate reader Danny is on the prowl for a thrilling read. That's a good book advertisement. I don't know if it's a good headline.
Yeah. You need these people writing your marketing.
Yeah. So anyway, that was fun.
Okay.
Oh, we got one more. We need to put up. Damian John's headline was, fair warning, Dymocks issues caution after another bookworm falls victim to Connelly's web of suspense and intrigue.
Nice one. Well, congratulations, everybody. Well done. And now we move to the questions, and there were lots of comments in the comment bar when I could see it, but now I can't. So I think Tim is going to shoot you through some of the questions that are coming from the audience.
Okay. I'm not getting anything yet.
Okay. Probably coming up.
Someone, while we're waiting for something. Oh, wait, here's something. Can Jack and Rachel come to Australia? That could happen. It's that's the classic fish out of water story.
Yes.
And I love doing those. I sent Harry Bosch to Hong Kong once, but I got to do it very sparingly because I think one of the things that connects my characters to readers is their connection to where they live and operate. And so sometimes it's fun. Like the Hong Kong book, Harry went there. It took place in a day, and it was like him not knowing anything about Hong Kong and making his way through that city, which is how I researched it. But that's probably the only Harry fish out of water story I'll do for quite a while, I think, because his connection to LA is what I think makes that character interesting. Jack is a little bit more of a vagabond because he's moved around the country and so forth. So, if he gets his teeth into a really good story, then maybe, he could follow it to Australia. I do love going to Australia. I got my Bondi Beach shirt on here.
Yep.
I was just there last year when you guys were having the fires. So I know that it's been a tough year all around the world, I guess.
It has indeed. And of course, I'm just remembering Joe Nesbo, his first book, The Bat, Harry Hooler was in Australia. Nesbo actually wrote the book, I think, on the way to Australia, or started the character. So Harry Hooler started in Australia before he went home to Oslo.
Right. I'm going to pick off one while we're waiting on a question. Oh, here it is. Let's see. I'm really interested in your daily routine. Do all writing days look the same for you? You have a strict schedule. I don't do anything strictly, but I just have this, again, kind of the answer I gave before. I've been given this opportunity, so I have to make the best of it. So I kind of impose a work ethic. To me, a perfect day is to start writing or be writing when the sun's coming up. and just something about the quiet in the mornings helps me concentrate. So if I can go till like noon to lunchtime, that's usually a good day for me. But as you progress through a book and get more and more words, you're getting more and more momentum. And so often in the second half of when I'm writing a book, the momentum carries me through, and I end up writing all day long,
Mm,
as long as I can.
mm, mm. Yeah. When the flow is happening, you stay with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I use all these different metaphors, but I think the best one is surfing. You want to once you get on that, there's a lot of paddling to get out there and get in position
Yeah.
to catch the wave. But once you catch that wave, you wish it would last forever.
Yes.
And that to me is a lot like writing.
Yeah. 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 Okay. We got another question coming up, Tim.
Yeah. What did you enjoy most about writing Fair Warning? This is actually a unique answer for me because usually it's the writing itself and the
Mm,
fulfillment. But this time around, I think the research was really, really quite interesting. And like I said, I went down this rabbit hole. This was a book that I probably over researched because there was so much out there. Like everything I would come up with would lead to another thing.
mm,
There's a lot of thought. There's universities that study this new idea of DNA research and so forth. And so I found myself continuing to research well past the point that I should have started writing. And that's function because I was enjoying it. I wasn't doing anything that I didn't like
yeah.
doing. So that's where that.
But there's a real danger there too, isn't there? That your book then reflects that heavy research. So you get so into it that you start kind of lecturing the reader on it. Did you have to pull back? Did you have to cut?
Yeah, I mean, I always do that. My first draft is always by far my longest draft, and that's one of the things I cut back because you don't want to, I call it larding up chapters and so forth. Look at me, look at all the stuff I found out, and
Mm,
I'm passing it on to you. You don't want to be in that situation. You also don't want to use this stuff to tell people how to think. I think this book throws out there what's going on in this world, and then people can choose what to do with their DNA. I mean, it's your DNA. Do with it
mm.
what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
here's another one. Uh, is your laptop plugged into power? So
Yes, it is. I don't know why it's died on me. I could disappear under the table and check if something's knocked it, but I have no idea.
somebody asked if I'm going to write any more Lincoln Lawyer books. Yeah, the book I'm having come out in the fall is a Lincoln Lawyer book. It's called The Law of Innocence, and it's obviously Mickey Haller, and I guess the short line on that one is it starts with Mickey Haller in jail. He's been arrested for a murder, and they say lawyers should not defend themselves, but Mickey doesn't want to put his future into anyone else's hands. He trusts himself more than anybody. So it's about him trying to orchestrate his defense from jail.
Mm,
That one's called The Law of Innocence, and it'll be out in November.
wow.
Um, and let's see what else we got here. How much time do you make for reading for pleasure yourself?
Ah,
Uh, Good question. I don't get a lot of time to do that because I can be writing when most people would be reading. So consequently, I've chosen to be a writer. And so even though I was a voracious reader, that led me to wanting to be a writer. Now it's not so much anymore. I mean, I read. You have to keep your gas tank full. I'm always reading for ideas and things like that. I read a few books about genetics part of my deep dive into this world. And then I really like to read other voices about Los Angeles. I pretty much write about Los Angeles,
mm,
a huge place, and there's so many unique voices out here.
mm.
People write about places I've never even been to, and they're in this city. They show an expertise, and it can really be like, oh wow, to me, very impressive. And I'm always looking for that kind of stuff.
I have to confess, I actually Google mapped some of the addresses in Fair Warning. I wanted to see where Jack was living, and I thought to myself, because I love that notion of the fiction and the reality and the interplay between the two, the one mapped onto the other, and I love crime novels with maps in them. So I just wondered, you ever thought about putting a map of LA in there?
Um, I haven't put one in the books. I mean, we have it on the website and stuff like that. I've often seen people who, or run into people like on book events and so forth, who tell me they're like you. They read the book and are googling all the time because now you can get visuals. You know, so if I mention it street, it only adds more pressure to me. Like I can't make anything up on a street figure. So, but that's fine. I mean, I think that's really interesting that people take the reading experience to that level, and that it really gets to the what's sacred about
Mm,
storytelling.
mm, absolutely. How are those questions going? We still got some more?
Yeah, here's another one. I love your book, but haven't read The Poet or The Scarecrow. Oh, this might be from my wife. Do I need to read them before Fair Warning? No, I don't. I actually don't write my books in that way. I mean,
No.
there's some interlinking. Like in this book, Jack is on the story. He needs some help with something, and he turns to this ex FBI agent named Rachel Walling. And he first met her in The Poet, and she's a character in all the books. But in some ways, I think I have two thoughts on this. One is the more you do something, the better you get at it. So I think Fair Warning is a much better accomplished piece of writing than The Poet.
Mm,
And the other thing is, if you read something like this and you like it, and you go back, there's a lot of aha moments. Oh, this is how they met.
yeah.
As Sue just kind of mentioned, they met when she was an FBI agent and threw Jack down on the bed because he was suspected of stealing classified information. So it's that's a cool thing to come across. Whether you're reading the first book or the last book, but I have no rules like that, and that extends to the Bosch books and the Lincoln Lawyer books as well. To me, it's all you can go forward and backwards as you please.
Yeah, and I think going backwards in time is kind of good because that's the reading crime experience anyway. The story of the crime is always a story that happened in the past. So, you're excavating, even if you go back in terms of reading the novels and the characters.
Yeah. Here's a cool one. It says, if you were stuck in quarantine with only one of your characters, who would you pick and why? Really, really interesting. It definitely would not be Harry Bosch because he hardly talks, and that would be boring. It might be Renee Ballard because Renee Ballard is closely based on a friend of mine who's a homicide detective, and she's kind of the opposite of Bosch in terms of personality and tells a lot of stories and talks a lot. And I think she would be interesting if you were in lockdown with somebody.
Mm, mm. I think you and Jack would get along too, though.
Yeah, I mean, but that's like being on lockdown with yourself, like a mirror. So I'll take Renee Ballard. All right.
Okay.
So, what do you personally like to read? We kind of already covered that. I look for LA stuff. There's, I don't know. I assume it got out in Australia. There's a LA writer named Ivy Pacoda, and she just had a book come out called "Those Women," about an area of LA that, yeah, I have to admit, sheepishly, I've never even stepped foot in, and she really owns it, and it's a very good story. Ivy Pacoda, yeah.
Right. I haven't come across her. I will chase her down. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Do you personally research all the restaurants mentioned in your book? Of course. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything that I've ever put in a book, like a bar or a restaurant, that I haven't done some heavy research in. No, I take, I get recommendations from people all the time, like, you ought to check this place out and all that.
Yeah.
And I try to go. There's a coffee shop in this book called The Koufax. that I'd never been to, but my daughter, who's a very big coffee fiend, told me about it. And I don't drink coffee myself, so I don't go to a lot of coffee shops. So I went and checked that out. So that's how I kind of find out a lot of these places.
That's lovely. Do you ever go back and find that they've discovered that they've been mentioned in your book and you get a free drink?
I haven't done that, but what's been helpful is that when we go to these places to shoot the show, Bosch, LA is like the center of film and TV. So a lot of these places get really tired of like, can we film here? Can we film here? Can we film here? From all these different productions, but we seem to have an edge because they end up getting people come to the restaurant and say, "Hey, I read about it in a Connelly book. So when we've come and said we want to shoot here, is that okay?" We get a lot of welcomes, and it's really been helpful in the making of the show.
That's lovely.
Someone asked about music and how important it is, and I think it is. I mean, you try to have a musical identity for some of your characters. I can't say I've done it all. Done it with all characters. Jack, I have not really gotten into the music part of it, but music is often useful to me in inspiring some of the work I do, especially with Harry Bosch. I mean, I really think he's connected with jazz, and jazz is not really my music. It's become my music because I've been working and writing about Bosch for so long. But initially, that was me being a reporter and looking into what he would listen to if he was a jazz guy. And it kind of went from there. But yeah, it's great.
But I think I've got somewhere a copy. Was it Trunk Music that you actually released with a CD of Harry's music?
Yeah, I mean, we did a CD of his music. I forget which book it was with. It was a promotional thing.
And I played it in the car endlessly. It was my favorite CD for a very long time.
Yeah, I have to say, someone came to me actually at a book signing in LA. He's in the music business, and he said like, you ought to do that. And I said, yeah, well, it's like a great idea, but what can I do about it? He goes, well, if you want to do it, I'll do it for you. And he was a music producer, and he made that record and got the rights and all that kind of stuff. And it is a great compilation of really great jazz, and it's become a bit of a collector's item. I don't have any left myself, but it's cool.
I've got one.
Put it on eBay. You'll make a fortune. Okay, so someone says, Sylvia asks, "Hi, how long does it take for you to plot the story in your mind before you put pen to paper?" It's funny. I want to always be writing. But this gets into the mystical part of writing, that where ideas come to you, and some of them, this is going to go the distance. This is a book, not a chapter, or not an aside, not an anecdote, and it just kind of comes together. I don't like to outline my books, but I don't start a book till obviously I know how it's going to start, and I have a very strong idea of how it will end.
Right.
And then I head out. That leaves me about 300 or so pages in between that I have no idea about, and that's the fun part of the job, just discovering that. It's just much more fulfilling a day to start your day without an outline that tells you what you're going to do. An outline can be like a boss. And so I start my day not really sure where I'm going to go, and sometimes it's a disastrous day. Sometimes I throw out everything I did, but more often than not, I like what I did, and I figure out what the next step will be the next day, and it kind of goes from there. It's just a good way to write for me.
Okay, we got any more coming through?
Yeah. Out of all your books, what is your favorite and why? I guess I should say my most recent book, because you're supposed to get better at what you do. But I have a sentimental favorite that is, yeah. I have a sentimental favorite that I don't think is my best written book. At least I hope not, because it's my fourth book. And I wrote it 20 some years ago. But The Last Coyote my favorite for two reasons. One, it's the basic story of Harry Bosch and why he's a cop, so I loved writing that. But it was also the first book I wrote when I was able to quit my day job as a journalist and concentrate fully on my writing. And I could just see almost daily how much better it was when I didn't have to put it aside and go to work and write news stories. And so it was a great year. I mean, I was probably 40 when I wrote that book, or close to it. And I had decided I wanted to be a writer when I was about 20. So it was like 20 years later, I'm kind of reveling that is what I'm doing now. And it might not last, but I think I have enough money to make a good run at it. And it was just a fun year. And it was also the year of the O.J. Simpson debacle. And so I was really kind of happy not to be involved in that as a reporter, to just be able to be at home and write my books. And that was the fourth Harry Bosch book. Right after that, I wrote The Poet and started with Jack.
And that was the beginning of a whole other story. Got another question there, or are we?
Last question.
Last question. Great.
And here it is. It better be a good one. From Luke. How do you figure out that next step once you've got the first start? Well, first of all, I guess I've been doing it a while, so it comes easier. But, a lot of times it's like long walks around the yard and stuff like that. You just start thinking. I learned to write by reading and by listening to other writers. And probably the best piece of advice I ever got was, I didn't get it personally. I read this. Someone asked Kurt Vonnegut, what's the best piece of advice you can give a writer? And he said, make sure that on every page, everybody wants something, even if it's just a glass of water. To me, that is the key to writing a novel, because it's about what characters want and how they go about getting them. And so I often look at pages and say, is it clear that somebody wants something here? Now, I'm lucky if I'm writing about Harry Bosch, he wants to solve a murder, and that can carry you through many pages. But I'm always thinking about big things he wants and small things he wants. He wants to find whatever he's looking for. He wants a cigarette, but he doesn't smoke anymore, that kind of thing. And all that adds together to character. And character is really the engine of momentum in a book. And so you're always kind of thinking of these things as you're writing. And, it's about momentum, building momentum, paddling out, getting on the surfboard, and getting some momentum on the wave. And, it comes from practice, comes from a lot of things. But oftentimes what you wrote yesterday should be able to bring you forward to what you're going to write today and tomorrow.
Oh, Michael, that's a wonderful note on which to end, which is the kind of vision of you there surfing your wave. Very happy and in the moment, completely there.
Yeah, to be completely honest, I haven't surfed I surfed in Hawaii about 20 years ago, but before that, I only surfed in high school, and I was quite bad about it. But I know how to use it as a metaphor.
And it works beautifully. So, look, thank you so much for your generosity and time. I know it's evening in LA at the moment, and it's midday here in Australia. And thank you so much on behalf of Dymocks and behalf of the readers and all the people who've been part of this, who've been typing away in the sidebar, which I was reading to start with and then couldn't. But thank you very much for tuning in. And please make sure if you haven't already, go and get a copy of Fair Warning. It's a fabulous read. And thank you to Tim in the background for doing all the technological work, which I obviously failed at. But thank you all, and goodbye. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you, Sue, for doing this, especially since you couldn't see us for most of the time. And you kept your eyes on the camera, even if it was dark, and it worked out pretty well. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.